This week I posted a YouTube video of a roast battle between Father Raphael and myself, and he said that I was just as good as quoting from Seinfeld as I am quoting from Scripture, so I thought I'd at least share one Seinfeld joke with you today. So Jerry Seinfeld, he said a study came out that revealed that the number one fear of the average person is a fear of public speaking. Number two is death. So he said, if you were to be at a funeral, you have more fear. You'd rather actually be in the casket than you would giving the eulogy. And today we're going to speak about this. We're going to speak about fear. So fear is a healthy human emotion, of course, when we are threatened in any way, like speaking in front of a crowd or dying. And the problem with fear is that it can settle into our hearts. That's the real problem with fear. It can settle into our hearts. And that's what is created is called a wound of fear when it settles into our hearts. Now, the first time this was ever experienced was our first parents in the Garden of Eden. To give a visual of what happened in the Garden of Eden, picture a playground surrounded by a fence. So the playground, it represents the Garden of Eden. Picture Adam and Eve, they're on a playground. That's the Garden of Eden. And the fence around the Garden of Eden, that's God's love. The fence of God's love gave them the security that they needed to freely play in the Garden of Eden. One day, though, Satan, he slithered his way through the fence and into the Garden of Eden. He was on the playground. And God allowed this because he's a loving father. He didn't create robots, he created human beings. And so human beings have to exercise their free will. So God gave them the opportunity in that moment to choose to trust God and just kick the snake back over the fence. But Adam and Eve listened to the snake. They allowed him to take over the playground. And as a result, they were kicked out of the Garden of Eden. And they no longer had the protective fence of God's love. As a result, fear began to settle into their hearts. And they experienced this wound of fear. And this fear was given to their children, Cain and Abel. So Cain and Abel were born into a world afraid. They no longer trusted their parents. They didn't feel safe and secure. And they were not able to actually experience God's protective love. And all of us, we are all children of Adam and Eve, born into this world. We all, in a similar way, have wounds of fear from our parents. So that's what we're going to talk about today. There are some big wounds of fear that some people here have experienced, like seeing your parents fight, verbally or physically, that leads to the belief, what settles down into your heart, is that you're not safe at home. Smaller fears could be like if you yourself get involved in conflict with your parents, whether verbal or physical, could be through disagreement or criticism. The fear that settles into your heart is that I can't trust them anymore because I've opened up my heart and I'm hurt. I don't want that again. That's what settles into your heart. Now, to explain the way that we respond to that wound of fear, I'll go back to the playground and fence imagery. Due to original sin, the first way we respond to the wound of fear is to create our own fence. We build a fence around our hearts. Because what settles into our heart with fear is that I'm not safe, I can't trust others, and you don't want that pain anymore, so you just protect yourself. You become self-reliant, self-sufficient. You no longer expose your heart to the fear and pain that comes with it. But this response of building our own fence around our hearts, it doesn't provide healing to the wound of fear. It just closes our hearts in. Just think, a fence around your heart. You can't get to the playground. You've enclosed yourself in. And so what happens is that we become incapable of experiencing intimacy and connection with those who are closest to us. For teenagers, you just kind of shut down your emotions. You don't want to reveal what's happening. And so you might just drown out the pain by addiction to video games. That could be one of the ways you respond. You become self-sufficient. You don't want to deal with your parents. Now, for married couples, what happens is that you become what's called married singles. You live a covenant without communion. So you have the covenant of marriage, good, but there's no communion. There's no intimacy on an emotional or physical or spiritual level because your heart is closed. You've built this fence around your heart. Now, the other way we can respond to the wound of fear, which is more tragic and more common today, is to find another playground. For teenagers, this often happens when you go off to college. What you do is you fall into the hookup generation culture, and you just jump from one playground to another. I'll let you fill in the blanks for what that means. And for married couples, the most tragic response is adultery. You seek a new playground without any fence. Because you're sick of the idea of a covenant without communion, because you're made for intimacy, you seek communion without covenant. You go to find another way to satisfy your desire for intimacy. It could be with another person, or it could just be online. I'll let you fill in the blank for what that means. But we know that this response as well doesn't lead to healing. It just leads to broken hearts. So we kind of have these two responses to the wound of fear, right? We can create a fence around our hearts, and what that does, it just closes us in and prevents any sense of intimacy or connection with other people. Or we can just go find another playground. And what that leads is to broken hearts. So those are the two common responses. Now there's a third way, and that's what God always provides us with. And this way provides actual healing from the wound of fear. So I'll put it all within the context of the playground and the fence again. Last year, I went to Whistler with my nieces, and we went to a playground. It was really beautiful, actually, to see my two nieces. I was with them, and we were running around this playground. It was all to ourselves, and they experienced total trust that I was with them. And so sometimes they would jump off, the top deck of things, and I would catch them, and they felt totally secure and safe because I was with them to play with them. They trusted as well that if they got hurt, I was going to be right there to provide a solution. So it gave them great safety and security to know that they're in the presence of someone that they love, and that allowed them to freely play on the playground with total trust. This gives a good visual of what healing looks like. In today's gospel, at the wedding feast of Cana, there's a couple who had a real experience of fear. The wine ran out. And so that was the most embarrassing thing that could happen at a wedding. So it was a fear for them, like, wow, this is a horrible way to start a marriage. And it was a common sign of that day that maybe your marriage is cursed and it's going to end in divorce. So that's what the wedding party was thinking. Now, the servants, they probably thought, I'm ready to get fired any second. So that's a real certain fear as well. But thanks be to God, rather than taking the approach of closing themselves in, maybe just shutting down the wedding, building that fence around their hearts to avoid embarrassment, or canceling their marriage and finding another playground, they actually experienced the intervention of Jesus. Jesus entered into their fear. Jesus took over the situation. They had invited Jesus into their wedding. And as a result, they experienced a real healing. Water was changed into wine. Dr. Bob Schutz, who I've been speaking about the wounds, the 7 deadly wounds, and today's the wound of fear, in his book, it's called Be Devoted. And if this stuff is triggering you, what I'm talking about as a married couple, this is a great book for you. It's called Be Devoted. This was Dr. Bob Schutz's story. He said when he was 14, his dad divorced his mom and left the home. For him, he said that was a real deep wound of fear that was created in his heart. And to respond, what he did, he said, he made this vow, I'm never going to get hurt again. And I never want to give that pain to someone else. So just picture building this fence around his heart. He doesn't want to experience the pain anymore. But eventually, after 12 years of his marriage, his heart was so closed off, he said. He was no longer in love with his wife, no longer experienced emotional intimacy with her. So people thought everything was great on the outside, but inside, he said, everything was closed off with his wife. And he actually said to his wife, I feel the only option is to divorce, but I can't believe it's God's will. He thought she was going to say, okay, let's get divorced. But she said, it isn't. And then his wife, Margie, told him, I don't want your half-hearted commitment. I want your devotion. Dr. Bob said from that day on, he invited Jesus into his fear. He invited Jesus fully into the fears that he had about marriage. The wound of fear that was created as a 14-year-old boy when he just closed off his heart to try to numb the pain. He finally opened it up and invited Jesus into the fear. And Dr. Bob shares about the transformation, although it's not immediate, it's slow, the eventual transformation that happened of continually inviting Jesus into the fears that he experienced. Eventually, he began to feel safe and secure in his marriage. He began to experience deep emotional intimacy with his wife. And his wife tragically passed away in 2017. But family and friends said to him that profound healing and transformation took place in their marriage. And imagine, all married couples out there, if this could be said for you. This is what Dr. Bob's wife, her sister, said to Dr. Bob. I am so touched to see you both so deeply in love with each other, even more than when you first met. You know, truly the best wine was saved till the end for that marriage. So the same can be true for us. What really happens is the wound of fear is alive in all of our hearts. But rather than close ourselves off and just build this protective fence, or rather than just flee and try to find another playground to distract ourselves from the fear, what we have to do is invite Jesus in. You know, the word intimacy from the Latin intimior means into fear. Intimacy with Jesus means inviting Jesus into the fear of your heart. And we all know closing our hearts off just leads to numbing the pain, and you can't experience emotional intimacy, which we're all made for, or just running away to find another playground. That eventually leads to broken hearts, both in the people that you're supposed to love and in your own life. So picture once again, you could all close your eyes if you want, okay? Picture yourself on a playground. You know, you could think about, what is the fear that I have right now? What am I not at peace with? It might actually be something about your marriage. Maybe you keep getting in fights about COVID. Or maybe you're just really afraid about the death of a loved one right now, which leads to so many fearful responses. Think about a fear that you have. And the message is, you're not safe. You can't trust anyone. You're all alone. Rather than close yourself off and create a fence around yourself or just run away, the response in that exact moment is to invite Jesus in. Invite Jesus into the pain and allow Jesus to become the doctor of your souls. Jesus knows how to heal the wounds of fear. So when Mary, as a good mother in today's gospel, says, do whatever he tells you, she's bringing us to the doctor and says, Jesus knows how to heal the wounds of fear in your life. And Jesus is the only doctor we can trust. You know, Dr. Bonnie Henry's going to let us down. I'm sure she's let a lot of you down. Jesus, Dr. Jesus, is the only one who guarantees to provide real and authentic healing in our lives. And this experience can happen even at Mass. Intimacy with Jesus is the most profound event that happens here at Mass. When you receive him in Holy Communion, Jesus wants to enter into those fears of your heart. But as a gentleman, he'll never force himself in. You have to invite Jesus into the fears if you want to experience real and authentic healing.